Okay, for people joining this meeting, it is part of our infinite series of incremental language development. No, this is not. This is a language completeness and consistency meeting. Wow, okay. So let's see. Oh boy, what is the first item here? This looks painful. It is a mistake for TableView of datasets to evaluate.
Yes, this is apparently something that was put in at the very end of the 12.1 development cycle.
But it's a necessary feature.
Why is it a necessary feature?
Because it's what you want to do. I mean, it's what you want. You're not going to have people indirectly say X equals dataset, table view of dynamic of X. Nobody will ever use it. I mean, this is basically a way.
Yeah, well, but people also don't. I mean, I don't think people should do that either. I mean,
okay,
right.
Let's get a data set and let's look at what we're talking about here. I mean, it's a very nice feature to be able to basically make a data set editable.
Well, you could. Well, if that's what you wanted to do, right, you could do.
What else could you do?
Right. This is the first I've heard of it, but from the sound of things, I'm horrified that I'm viewing a data set and then I accidentally type into the table view cell or something, and now my data set has changed. I really hope that's not true.
It is. I mean, it's no longer a data set. If you look at the input form of that thing.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. So it's not altering the data set in place.
No.
I'm
in no way.
Significantly less horrified.
In no way.
Which is what the dynamic of data set would have done, right?
Exactly. Yes. I don't know if that would have worked. Does that actually work?
No, that wouldn't work. I mean, we could talk about whether it should work, but it doesn't work now.
Right. I mean, so to make that work, we would have to basically have mutability of data sets, and data sets are right now not mutable. I mean, data sets, there's no operation that says, I mean, if I say of a data set here, so let's say this is a data set, I don't even know what happens if I say prepend to.
Well, then you get a new data set.
Well, but I have no idea what it even, I mean, can I in fact prepend? So let's imagine that I have a data set that I make from some very simple. Okay, so now I say prepend to ds2 xy. Okay, so I have a new data set now. So with TableView, so I mean, if I did, I don't even know if this works. If I do dataset sub 1, 2 equals z. Okay, I don't understand why that said that. I don't think it can be an L value. Does anybody know?
Probably because it was implemented on the cheap, and that's right. So, I mean, it's not transparent, right? Data set is not transparent to part. And so since the data set is marking itself as atomic, then it's saying, right. So the prepend to works via up values. It's not actually working through any deep support. So
I see. So it's a specific data set up value. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This all has to be implemented manually. This also could be implemented. It's not yet.
I see. Is Chris Carlson here?
He requested not to be, but
okay. It's not very helpful, but yeah. Well, okay, so
right, but my point is that first of all, right, we're already getting questions from people of like, why does data set of why does table view of list AB not format?
Yeah, right? It should, I think.
Look, no, it shouldn't.
Look, okay.
Steven, table view is a control. The default control type is string, right? Is strings.
I don't think it's a very useful.
Strings and numbers.
Strings and numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But you know what? Okay. There is a very useful object, which is an editable table. This is what, when
right, but
we
data sets aren't table. The whole power,
I know.
Stephen, the whole power of data set is that they can deal with non-tabular input.
I'm well aware.
So why do you want to weaken the brand by?
Hold on.
Let me finish my sentence.
Why
do you want to weaken the brand by suggesting it's equivalent to something that's inherently tabular?
Okay, that's not the point. Okay, so let's look at multiple things that we have that are all kind of overlapping in bizarre ways. Okay. So this is tabular stuff. Okay. What do we have? We have grid, okay, which is editable like this, right? Which is editable in kind of a table view like way, right? Yes, it's the same type of thing. We can do, I can add a column, I can add a row, I can do this, etc., etc., etc. And I assume that in TableView here, if I were to do
it is typesetting, but it is not a control.
I understand that. That. But this control obsession, I think, let's forget about the. Okay, so here's a question. Why does control return not add a row to a table view?
Well, you mean insert a row
of
blank
just like it does.
Because normally, of course, you don't need to add. You have an infinite number of rows. Unless
I understand that, but I might want. How would I shift down a row? How would I shift what's in 6 to 7?
So I don't remember if there's something in the contextual menu, but there are reasons this is still experimental. So
how would you do that in your average JRandom spreadsheet?
You would use a menu command, insert row or insert column. I don't think there's typically a keyboard shortcut for it, but there are definitely menu commands for it.
Right, but I mean, in fact, we have an obvious keyboard shortcut. Right? I mean, we have
unless you have what happens if you have inside of your table view a grid in a cell, then which guy gets that shortcut?
That, I think, is a John issue, and I think he would have a solution to that, but I'm not sure.
I mean, it is certainly a question that I would consider quite quickly, yeah.
Okay, so let me just list off what we have, and then we're going to list what things they do, okay? So we've got grid, we've got data set, we've got a naked list and association. Okay, and then we've got table view here. Do we have anything else? Well, we've also got these slightly,
we have column.
Like yeah, we've got row, column. Well, the row, column, grid are all the same story.
Well, row is actually really quite different from grid and column.
Yeah, no, row is not at all the same as column.
Okay, so we have yet another thing which is kind of row here. And
row is the cleanup version of sequence form, so it's really not in.
It's really a typesetting thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so in addition to this, we have things like table form.
Which by the way, I've just been playing around with here in the last few minutes, and there are some interesting properties in terms of how it interacts with other things. I don't know how much you want to dig into that for answering these questions. But like dataset of table form produces a dataset with the table form strips. Table view of table form does not typeset, but strips the table form.
Are you sure it's really?
No. I'm sorry.
You were doing percent type thing.
Yeah. And actually, I should have been.
Okay, so there's a question for table form. When should functions strip it? E.g., dataset. Strip it. And I would argue. I mean, I hadn't even thought of that, but I would argue that would be a common thing to want to do.
Although generally speaking, right, functions don't strip table form or matrix form.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Okay. And by the way, I said the wrong thing about TableView. TableView does strip table. So both Dataset and TableView are stripping table form. I don't fully understand the mechanism. I mean, if that's just
so you're saying that Dataset
implementation
of table form of ABCD.
Yeah, and if you look
wait a
at
minute, I see no evidence that worked. That looks to me like a data set of one element.
Yeah, I think that's in the data set of one element.
If I do a normal...
Oh, sorry, maybe I'm misinterpreting the input form here. I don't have enough experience with
the normal form. Yeah, no, it's not doing anything. It's just taking it in one gulp.
Okay.
Right, and I doubt that TableView does anything different.
Another point being made on the live stream by Carl is that gallery view is another thing a bit like this.
Although gallery view is web only and not really very well specified.
Although it should be available in the desktop.
Right, and we asked the web team for a specification so that we could implement it, and we never got one. So it just sort of sits there.
Push harder. Okay, so gallery view does not make it sound like it's a control. So this is probably not a control. Okay, there's a separate issue, which is getting the specs from the web team. That was, I think Ricardo was the implementer of this, so I think he's the one to push on that. Okay. Yes, can somebody do that?
Yes, yeah.
The path? Okay.
I can do that.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, which can be L values? Basically, nothing here can be an L value. Is that correct? Well, except for list can be an L value. List and association can be L values, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, list certainly can, and association with certain random exceptions, I think, also can.
And then TableView as a control works as a kind of an L value.
Okay. All right. So those can be L values, but now TableView.
TableView is an L value in the sense that any control is an L value,
right.
Like slider.
Yeah, I don't look. Okay, so let's be clear. I think there's a very useful piece of functionality, which is an editable table that has nothing to do with it being a control. Right? That is very much more like grid functionality, because grid is effectively a, you can edit it. It, displays and is editable, but it's definitely not an L value. Not an L value, I mean, if I were to say, let me just understand something. If I were to say, ZZZ equals whatever, ABCD, and then I were to say dynamic, I see. So the difference is if I say dynamic of grid of ZZZ, I get that. If I change ZZZ here, I will get that. Okay, all good. But what doesn't work is to say grid of dynamic of ZZZ.
Right, because grid is not a control.
Okay, so that will do nothing. I will just come back as grid of that because it can't read through the dynamic.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
This typeset is a dynamic box, not as a dynamic value.
Okay. Okay, so now TableView, on the other hand, in the same setup, would be if I say TableView of ZZZ. What?
You need the second argument expression because the default control type is strings and numbers.
Right.
That's even more obscure. No message, nothing. But why was there no message?
Because generally speaking, typeset things and controls don't give messages.
I mean, basically the point here is...
I agree that there's some confusion around this, and we haven't resolved how to deal with it. But
right.
Yeah.
So I think there probably are two things here. I think that we have essentially the same code, same functionality, but I think there are two different kinds of operations. I think one is this control thing, which I think is really an expert programmer story. Okay. And the other is I've just got something that is like a grid that I want to be able to edit, but I want it to have different editing controls than a grid. And where the main use I'm going to make of it is I'm going to shift enter the thing. And well, I mean, if I shift enter this, right?
It'll give you a table view.
Yeah, it evaluates to itself.
Okay. Which is okay. I mean, okay, so hold on a second. If I say table view of, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, hopefully this will now work because it's actual numbers. Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, now if I want to get out the payload, I can presumably say normal of that.
Right.
I could also say setting, presumably, of %47 because it's a control, and I will get that out.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, to me, I mean, and I think we haven't really internalized this point properly. You know, I think it is very, very useful to just, I mean, okay. The question is, I mean, there's a useful thing here, just typing random stuff in, hitting, no. Wait a minute, what the heck happened there?
Well,
it's got empty cells, although they're not uniformly empty. That's a bug.
Yeah, it's a bug. It should be showing as a table view. Look, if it can be displayed, here's my point of view. If the thing displays as a table view,
wait. No, I'm sorry. That's not a bug. The reason is because it's empty rows. It's rows with 0 elements, and we're allowing ragged row lengths. So it's a ragged row length with 2 rows that have 0 elements in them.
So what? So why isn't it displaying as a table view? I don't think it has any.
I'm sorry. Your question is why isn't it displaying as a table view? Yes.
I think it's a bug.
That is a bug.
Okay,
yes,
fine.
That is a bug.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it should display as a table view. So in general, anything you can enter in a table view, if I type Shift Enter, it will just come back as itself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I can imagine that there is, if we got rid of our thinking about this as a control, and we maybe we'll branch the names. I'm not sure what we're going to do, right? But I could imagine that just like a bunch of other things, just like a manipulate, for example, has that button that says paste, paste me. You see what I'm saying? That I could imagine that this could also have a paste me button that is the equivalent of doing normal of the thing, right?
Yes, that's not unreasonable.
Okay, so I mean, if we do this, then just to remind ourselves what's going on here, we would say paste snapshot. Okay, now that comes back as that. Although I think what we really want here is, it's just a paste that pastes the payload. Now here's another question. What happens, why does TableView not allow, does TableView allow header names, column names?
It will.
Okay. So then
that was just a feature we couldn't quite clean up in time for the 12.1 release.
Okay.
But it will.
So we'll allow row column names.
Yeah.
Like Dataset. Okay. Now the big difference from Dataset. Why is it different from Dataset? Different from Dataset, by being 2D and having blank elements.
Well, it's not just that it's 2D, it's sort of inherently tabular, right? I mean, so for example, consider this example. So do Dataset, and give it an association. A goes to the association, B goes to C, and make them strings just to be on the safe side.
Okay.
And just close that. And now do table view of %.
Oh, you're gonna have to add expression again because of this. I don't know how the C is gonna come through, but yeah.
That's wild.
Right.
What the heck did it do there? Why did it drill down? I mean, what happens if I do table view of the Titanic? That's what I did here. So what happens if I take one of these hierarchical data sets?
You can do data set of the table view again. So the idea is that it's doing effectively normal in both directions.
Okay, hold on. Let me look at this for a second. So you're saying that if I do, let's say I say example data. What was all that junk, by the way? And I'm sorry, what was all that junk? Oh, that's all DocuTools. Okay. Example data, data set, and then oops, and then I say the planets data set, for example. So that's a hierarchical data set. Okay, so now let's imagine I do table view of this. It's going to make a an animal breakfast or something. Yeah, it's garbage. What the heck is that?
Okay, so there's you've triggered. Okay, so I think you've triggered the bug where certain certain boxes don't display if there are blank rows. It's really funky. But so I think you're seeing the boxes. I don't know if you do normal of that, then maybe grid.
Yeah, do data set of that table view.
Oh yeah, it's all the number forms inside of quantity. That's
I mean, a lot of things have been lost. I mean, the like here. Well, okay, that's just because there are no row names. Okay, so it stripped off row and column names.
Right.
But we already knew that was going to happen because that was an incomplete feature of TableView.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's go back again to what we actually want here. Okay. What is the functionality we're really trying to get? So one thing that I consider super useful is being able to get, I've got, okay, let's look at what the workflow is. I've generated some data. Blah, this is a lot of data here. I've generated some data. Okay, let me give an example here. Right, so let's say I do random integer 10,55. Okay, and now I say I want to edit that. I want to get rid of the zeros, for example, or whatever the heck I want to do. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I say is, so how do I do that? So let's imagine I do this. I say table view of that. And I say, great, I can just go and edit this. Let me go click there, and I'm going to take that and turn it into -1. I'm going to click there, I'm going to turn it into -1. And then I'm done. And
you do / normal after your control there, right? In 60, you could have just,
I mean, presumably it's useful to me to have this table view be preserved. Presumably,
okay.
I'm not totally certain that it is useful, but let's. I mean, because you could equally well, if the thing has all the information, then you could as well say / table view if you want to get another table view out. In other words, if the table view is exact, okay, here's a question for John and others, okay? Does table view, I mean, dataset clearly, okay, does table view contain any additional information over and above what is present in the array in the list array?
It can contain style information, and potentially, let's see, what other sorts of things. Certainly style information.
When there are headings, the headings will be options to the table view.
Okay, so in other words, there are things in table view that are not. So that's an argument for keeping table view in the output and having to do an actual operation like normal to get rid of the table view.
Yeah, which is consistent with what all of our other controls do.
Right, because and also if we had it automatically remove itself, that means whenever you program programmatically generated an interface that involved TableView, somehow TableView would magically disappear.
Guys, listen. I am not at all certain that there's just one function here.
Well, let me say back your earlier idea to have some widget on the table view that can just paste out its contents. I think that's a pretty reasonable idea.
Right, and similarly, I think if Dataset had a try to convert to TableView, that I'm not sure I'm necessarily sold on that, but it basically the TableView of Dataset is, Jose can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's doing some sort of normal and possibly rearranging of things to try to make it into a matrix, or at least a depth sort of to list of lists. And why not just, if you want to do that sort of destructive operation, then why not just do table view of normal of Dataset, and then you know what you've lost.
Well, fair enough, but look. One issue is the very dramatic graphical difference between TableView and Dataset here. I mean, we've got, to be clear, we've got three things here, right? We've got grid as well. And, it's kind of weird. We're looking at these three things. They look different. I mean, it's good that they look different because they are different. But
well, but of course, grid only looks different because you've done grid with 0 options, right? And if you, with enough options, you could make how does Dataset work if not by creating,
Yeah.
How does Dataset display itself if not by creating grids? I know maybe it's directly creating grid boxes rather than grids, but.
Okay, so let's go back to a few things. By the way, Carl is complaining about this extra box around Dataset. I don't even know why we have that. Does anybody know why we have that?
Because if you have enough, look at one of the bigger data sets, right? It's so that that it's to hold all the extra stuff. So it's one thing as opposed to having sort of disembodied scroll bars.
Yeah, there's an argument that there should be an appearance option. I don't know why Chris isn't here, but
I originally invited him and he declined. So
okay, well, who knows? Okay, but in any case, that's the thing maybe for Jose, that maybe there should be an appearance option for Dataset that can remove that out of frame.
Perhaps if we had some color around it so that it looked like a solid thing rather than a floating thing.
I don't know. Design question, but it seems to me that having an appearance option which could select between different themes for that would be a good thing.
Oh, yes. Right. Themes for Dataset would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
And you may remember that we cycled quite a bit on the extra frame, and we ultimately decided that having it there when it's not necessary is better than not having it there when it is necessary, and having disemboweled floating pieces of it.
Fair enough, but why don't we have an appearance option which can?
I'm all in favor of that. I'm just saying that this is why this is what we settled on as the default. I have no objection to having ways to tweak that.
Okay, all right. So let's again go back to what this is about. Okay, so Carl is pointing out here that a very common thing to want to do is to say, "Oops, there's a mistake in the data set." Let's I want to edit that cell in the data set.
Yeah, and you can't even copy it out. Oh, we now have copy to clipboard. That I guess I hadn't discovered that button yet.
Let me ask this question: is there any good reason why we don't allow editing even at the level of a right click? At the level of a right click, we certainly could edit. It's a lot more apparatus to be able to edit, and a lot more issues to be able to edit directly. But at the right click level, I would have thought it was possible.
we'd really need.
That would depend on the typesetting, and I think only Chris can really answer that.
Can we see if we can find Chris?
But also, doesn't that get back to my issue at the beginning of the meeting? I mean, right now we're talking about having to do multiple clicks to get there, but even so, all we have is the output, right? So, and do we really want to modify the data set in place and not worry about how many other variables it's been assigned to and that sort of thing?
Yes. It's like everything else that we can edit and output. I mean, the question of whether there's a copy down is another question.
Oh, I see. But now I'm wondering about the utility of editing it in output without having it being reflected anywhere in memory.
Well, right. I mean,
then you could evaluate it again, right?
Yeah.
What the heck just happened there? Oh, that was something.
It went from output into an input cell.
No. I was confused by the stringiness of it, and that was because I had entered that specifically.
Yeah, although it shouldn't. It should not. It should have kept it as a number. I think it got confused by the negative sign. That's a bug.
Okay. All right, but so another point here is this didn't copy down. Okay. And I know that was a decision made many years ago.
What didn't copy down? I'm sorry.
Okay, so if I were to type something like 567, okay, and now I start editing this.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute. Am I totally confused?
Yeah, and it changed to an input cell.
No, it changes to an input cell.
The brackets aren't updating in real time or something.
Yeah, there's I don't know why it's grouping that way. That's
start typing a new cell, and I bet it loses the outer bracket on the 567.
I think that's a bug. But wait a minute. Wasn't it the case for millions of years that there's a copy, or is this the copy down that it turns into an input cell?
It's the, you can think of it as an elided copy down. It's just replaced it in place, essentially.
What causes pure copy down?
There's an option to control it, and I have to go.
But that option is off right now.
Right.
But don't I sometimes get? Well, I mean, the behavior we're seeing right now is good, except for that weird cell grouping thing.
Yeah, no, it's kind of an awkward option naming that I was never happy with and was not personally responsible for. The original option was cell edit duplicates, and then we have the cell edit duplicate makes copy. Because sometimes you want to duplicate without making a copy. It's a bit of a head scratcher, but that's what it is, and it's what it's been for a while.
Okay, so what's the difference between those two?
Between which two?
Those two options.
I was confused.
Sorry. Cell edit duplicate is whether it does anything at all, and cell edit duplicate makes copy is whether it converts it in place or whether it makes an actual copy.
I see, and leaves the original out untouched.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so back to
so it's basically we took a 2-valued option and we turned it into a 3-valued option by adding a second option. Mm-hmm. And we didn't even fill out all 4 values.
This was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really sounds like one option which should have had like another
yes,
value.
Yes, it really should have.
Okay, let's come back to this, all right? So what we've got here, this solution of I want to edit in a data set. I've got a data set, but I want to edit something. We want to figure out what workflow should support that, recognizing that fully editing a data set is a very complicated matter, because if I get my general data set here and I drill into, somewhere deep down in Himalaya, which I've never heard of, moon of Jupiter, and I'm drilled down here and I decide, I've got the radius of that moon wrong, and now I want to edit this, right? So that's an operation that would seem to me to be a useful thing with the turn it into an input cell. let me understand something else. Okay, very naive question, which I should know the answer to. If I take one of these, if I take the data set, I take it and I start putting it in, I put it in an input cell. Oh my gosh, that is not good. Okay, so that's our first Bugosaurus.
Yes, we know about that one. Chris has a fix for that.
Okay, all right, so fine. So then,
although I would point out that any fix may very well break editing, because if you turn off show string styles,
show string characters, you mean?
Show string characters, yes. Then the editing behavior becomes
well. There isn't any editing. The thing is uneditable here. But
right. But I'm saying that fixing this by turning off show string characters may make editing difficult to impossible.
Okay, but so to me, a flow that would be pretty reasonable is that something, and it might not just be clicking, because clicking, okay, so clicking on a label, clicking on one of these does nothing, right? And it could do something. It could bring up a menu or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And rather than just getting you into an inputs mode, if the goal is, I want to edit some of these, it might be nicer to just go in sort of spreadsheet style. I mean, of course, remembering that's quotes spreadsheets. So we've got two styles of editing one of these things. We've got the grid style, where the thing changes size as you edit. And we've got the kind of table view spreadsheet style where it doesn't change size, where it keeps the structure of the whole grid, right? Now, so one thing we might hope for in a data set is that you click and it lets you edit. Now, in a perfect world, maybe it would let you edit directly. Maybe. It's not even obvious that's the best idea. But to at least give you a menu that would allow you to edit does seem like a nice thing. And then the question is, what would that mean? So assume the thing has been copied down to an input so that it is an input, so it's an input, right? Because we can see that you can put a data set as a piece of input. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And it will then be ingested properly, right?
Yep. And as long as it's not too big, right? It's subject to $1 in notebook inline storage limit, just like summary boxes are.
Okay.
Exactly, because for example, file-backed datasets could not be edited.
Let's think about that comment. Did Chris just join?
Yes.
We've been asking about a lot of things to do with dataset. We've been talking about an appearance option so that we can get rid of the outer frame. I think that's fairly straightforward, but maybe that's already on the docket, is it?
No.
Should be. Okay. Then the main thing we've been talking about is the relationship between dataset, table view, and some other things. I'm not sure why you thought you shouldn't be in this meeting. Maybe there's something I don't know.
Well, the agenda items that I saw were not my things, but go ahead.
Okay. Well.
So I take care of dataset things that involve the front end, things that involve just the kernel. Jose does.
Okay.
So the table
all right, fine. So one of the issues is, people want to have some workflow for editing in a data set.
Right.
And the question is, how do we achieve that?
Well, what you suggested in the past was that you click on something, you can get like a pop-up editing thing to edit that cell.
Oh, well, I just suggested the same thing again.
I wonder maybe this is a minor implementation difference, but I wonder if what you get is like an attached cell, right? Or box that, right? So it's off to the side or something, but maybe
possibly,
that's
yes.
Yeah, I think that was the idea.
Okay, but so the question that is now before us is we've got three constructs: grid, dataset, table view. Okay, and they all deal with tabular data.
Right.
And I think there's the question, and they all have, grid is very much an output story, is a low-level output story, and arguably we shouldn't be kind of promoting it as a common thing. I mean, it should be promoted only, maybe, as an output story. I mean,
Grid, you mean?
Grid. I was. Yeah,
well, yes, and that is exactly how it is promoted. I
well,
think.
except that I, for example, quite often use it to enter data. Now, maybe in today's world, I should be using TableView. But if I'm going to use TableView, here's the very, very typical workflow, okay? I have a machine-generated thing that I got from who knows where, and I want to edit it. That is the workflow that I'm trying to follow. So any weird nonsense with dynamics and this, that, and the other, totally irrelevant. Not what I want.
Mm-hmm.
What I want is I've got this blob of data. I mean, like for instance, I've got I've got something. I don't know what I must have had this even the last few days. I've got what was the thing I had recently? Oh, who knows? I've got a table of mappings between references to this and that, and I want to conveniently edit them. I mean, form notebooks will provide yet another way to do these things, but by using different cells for different data elements. But in this case, we're using different rows of a tabular structure, right? And this, so that's my workflow. Is I've got something. I've got an existing piece of data. It's from a file, for example. I want to update what's in that file. I want to bring it into something that I can conveniently and tabularly edit, and then I want to send it back out again. That's what I want to do. I don't want any nonsense with controls, anything like that. That's the story. So what's the best way to do that? I mean, right now, I often use Grid to do things like that. But I think TableView is a better solution, isn't it? Or something like TableView, something that uses the code base of TableView. I mean, if TableView is being taken for some kind of weird control thing, okay, so that's a workflow. Do we agree that that's a workflow that is important?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, John, do you understand, and Itai, do you understand and agree that that's an important workflow?
So let me make sure I didn't miss anything. So basically, you have some generated data, you want to inspect it, fix any things, then assign it to something and continue with your machine processing.
It doesn't necessarily have to be assigned to anything. I mean, it's just that I want to have that data and continue doing something. I might want to write it out to a file. I might want to do all kinds of things to it.
Okay. Yes,
the problem
I agree that that's a very common workflow.
The problem I always have with that kind of thing is, what do you get when you edit? Do you get a string? Do you get a number? Do you get something else? And how do you determine what you get?
Well, and I don't think that's quite right yet in TableView. Okay. I mean, I don't think it's quite right, but we're getting there. That's a separate issue to be solved, right? And it could very well be that we should be doing something which is some kind of auto detect in TableView, where if we've got a big table where everything seems to be a number, that mostly a number is what you're going to get. Am I making sense? John, did you see what I'm saying?
What's the relation with the insert matrix menu? Could have an insert something that specifies the properties.
Nobody ever uses that menu. I think that menu is going to go the way of the triangle.
And by nobody, you mean you don't.
That would be a correct translation. I mean, I have used it, but it's I
mean, I'll be honest, I don't use it very often, but I've certainly answered questions about it.
Yeah, and I have used it. I'm not sure it's the best way to get what you want there. I mean, what you're getting there, see, look, I think we're getting confused by talking about TableView as a control. I think we have something with the same functionality that isn't a control, because one of the things that will be very useful is just make me a table that is, well, actually, I don't know, that by default shows some number of rows and columns. Make me a table view or a table view-like thing that shows a certain number of rows and columns that is expandable. Am I making sense? John, you understand what I'm saying?
And interpret it as a list of lists?
Ultimately, yes. When it's, well, whether that happens on Shift-Enter or whether that's something that I get from normal, I'm not sure.
So, and this is of course because of the order in which things were developed, but in part, but Gridbox is, it's not a control, but it is like that. It is interpreted as a list of lists.
I'm aware.
Yeah.
Right,
And-
I'm aware. I'm saying that there's a lot of features in TableView, right, which are desirable. Gridbox and Grid was not really intended as a major editing, data cleaning environment, right?
Yeah, and and we've played with the idea of having controls that are a part of kind of a more, I don't know, literate sort of programming or something. It's always bothered me that to do that you either have to explicitly wrap setting around it, so you just make the code more verbose, or you have to have some kind of weird typeset thing, which, I mean, if you know what you're doing, you can create just fine. But that, like a slider that evaluates as a number, not as a slider of a number.
Yeah, I know. I mean, well, that is the defer mechanism. Is it defer? Or what is the mechanism that does that?
Dynamic setting.
Okay. Right. So dynamic setting. So if I say something like f of, I mean, but then I have to do f of dynamic setting slider, and then I have to go command enter that, and now I get my slider, and now I do that.
Yes.
I mean, that's beautiful functionality, crummy way to get it.
Right. And I'm bringing this up because I think when you're talking about this in the context of TableView, I think this is a more general issue.
Right. I mean, this is very useful.
Not that we might like to crack in other places.
Right. I mean, colors, it's also very useful to be able to do this.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, so really what this is about, if you want a slider and you're going to get it by typing, the only way you can have it turn into a visible slider is by evaluate in place, I think. I mean, the only other possibility would be, which is something we could do, is to have a palette that basically puts a slider in there. Not a completely crazy thing to do. I mean,
but I don't know how much people would use it, but it's certainly one way that this could be done. Yes.
I mean, it's similarly for colors and things like that. So it's something I had not thought of before, but it would be a somewhat reasonable thing to do. I mean, to have a slider that's been optimized for basically, okay, so let me be even more extreme. Maybe we should have an escape, SL escape, that just puts a slider in somewhere. Puts a dynamic setting slider in.
Maybe.
Now, the issue with the dynamic setting slider is that...
Right. I mean, I will point out that the one big issue with that is that you could only ever have sliders from 0 to 1 with an escape sequence.
I know, but there might be some way to fix that, or it might be that that's actually, already very, very useful.
I think checkboxes for Booleans would be even more useful. A dynamic setting checkbox.
Okay, so you're suggesting an escape code and a palette, basically, that just enters those things.
No, you were suggesting that. I'm saying it makes sense for checkboxes, in my opinion.
Well, you're right. I agree with you completely. But I mean, let's just understand the semantics of what would happen there. So there's a checkbox there, and as soon as you evaluate, that is equivalent to true, for example, upon evaluation. So you only see it in your input code, right?
In your typeset input code, yes. In a front end.
And in a non-front end, you would see dynamic setting of checkbox open close, and that's okay. It'll just evaluate to whatever it evaluates to, and it's a bit ugly, but it's not harmful. Yeah, this is an interesting. Okay, this is a great thing. We've had a good idea, so at least for today we can put one pin in the good idea category. This is a good thing. We should have both a palette version and an escape code version. If somebody could make up a list of things that maybe Lou could make up a list of things for which we should do this.
I can do that.
Is there an obvious reason why escape?
Actually, the one way to do this would be also as something that comes from a completion. And there you can have a very good idea. Oh, this thing takes a color, so we'll just throw a color widget in the possible completions.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea.
And if it takes a range of numbers, then we might know, because we know what function we're completing, that this is a range from 0 to 1 or from, -1 to 1 or whatever.
Right. Well, so I mean, what this then allows is, with an option which can be true or false, we could allow that as one of the option value settings, a checkbox. That would be really cool. Really cool. Great idea. I mean, my question is, in the escape code stuff, is it totally obvious that we can't have parameterized escape codes? That you can't say escape SL 1,7?
I mean, yes, we certainly could implement such a thing. I'm not sure that we should, but we could.
Okay. Why doesn't Lou inventory?
When I say I'm not sure that we should, I simply mean I'm not sure that anyone would really actually use it, is what I mean.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I agree. The only thing I can imagine is that something like SL5, a slider from 1 to 5, might be quite useful.
Well, I could tell you that Emacs users would use it, except they'd expect it in the order escape number and then the control.
Well, okay. So Lou, can you try and make up a list of things like this that we could have, including something like SLN, not the special linear group of
I understand.
Okay. All right. So let's come back to our question here so somebody was complaining about, I mean, the thing that it's just freaking weird. Why does this look so different from these other things? Is it different font size, or what is it that makes this look so different? Is this for some reason a larger font size?
No.
I think it's Dataset that has the special fonts.
I see.
I mean, if you, I mean, I don't know if that's a list of lists or a list or a data set containing associations, but you could try grid of normal of the data set.
Okay. Well, okay.
I mean, maybe it should be a smaller font. Maybe instead of using exactly the output font, maybe we should tick it down a point or two.
Yeah, it just looks very clunky. But I mean, okay,
Now, okay. I should say it's also the case that most spreadsheets don't use monospace fonts. We are using a monospace font here.
Why?
Well, I mean, because that is our normal thing. I mean, maybe it doesn't make. I think.
I mean, so John,
I think it's something that merits that merits discussion.
Yeah,
John,
it's not clear to me that one is, which one is definitely superior. What you got, Brett?
So isn't it common in spreadsheets that the display depends, sort of on what the type is? So like alignment would be left or right, depending on whether it's a number or a string.
But the font is typically uniform unless you've actually styled it.
Right.
Oh, you're saying whether it goes to the left or the right of the cell?
Well, so there's, I mean, there's all kinds of things. Codes. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that you can configure in terms of, styling, background alignment, so on. Well, one of the things is, oftentimes fields will have a data type, and so it might be a currency or a date or something like that, and some of those types bring along some style information with them. Typically alignments.
Okay. But okay. By the way,
right. But what my idea is that we could use a different font for common types, number, string, whatever. But expers are monospaced.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yes, I mean, I think it wouldn't be bad to distinguish those things in some hint type way. You know, Carl is commenting on the live stream that he thinks Dataset looks really nice, and it's one of the big reasons he uses it in notebooks. And I agree. You know, I agree with that. I think it looks nice, and I agree that that is a big attractor for people, including myself, to use it. And right now, TableView looks extremely clunky. Although TableView I view as being much more of a, you know, it's once you take the cover off, you're seeing all the electronics inside, so to speak. It's a thing that I don't think it's a thing that you mostly would have as a piece of output display. Do people agree with that claim?
Exactly. And that's sort of part of why I was thinking, you know, mixing TableView and Dataset. Maybe what we really need is like a, I don't know, Dataset table or something to take, right? Because you also lose, right, when you do this, you lose the information of was this an association or was this a list of lists, etc. It's a pretty lossy operation to just sort of auto magically happen.
I agree, but I mean, this is just like if you go into a grid, you lose. You know, grid can't preserve associations.
Well, it doesn't, but it also doesn't. It doesn't corrupt them. It just leaves them there. Is my point.
Where's the corruption coming in?
Well, if
the corruption
right,
comes
so
in
if
from TableView
if
effectively doing normal on the data set.
Right.
Well,
okay,
you're doing
so
more
this is
than
the
normal,
question.
actually.
Right.
So if you go to the example I showed you of the
I already got it. I mean, the basic point is that TableView of dataset is a hacky, destructive operation at the present time. And
right.
You are particularly objecting to the fact that it's hacky. Your dimension of hackiness is it doesn't behave like a control because it's doing evaluation. Another dimension of hackiness is it's blowing, you know, it's kind of drilling into the data set and sucking out random pieces of it and not preserving other parts.
Right.
Okay.
So there are two levels of hackiness, and
right.
So I think.
Sorry, presumably once TableView supports headings, it should support associations as well in input, right?
We have certainly talked about supporting associations, but we haven't. There are probably some design questions that raises that we haven't broached yet.
Well,
right, but it's never going to support the hierarchical stuff that Dataset supports. It is not in its nature. I mean,
correct. That is absolutely correct.
Right, but I think we are always thinking about the relation here of two-dimensional objects.
Yes. That's right. But I mean, so the basic point is, okay, let me try it a different way. TableView, perhaps incorrectly named, is taking a two-dimensional view of a thing, which could be a slice of a data set, and allowing you to edit it. So it's taking a two-dimensional projection of something and allowing editing. So for example, for data set, I claim what it should do is that the cells of the table view, I mean, it is not a very nice thing. If you have a deep data set that is much more than, you know, than two-dimensional, then what should happen is in TableView, it should just have those sub data sets be sitting there inside the cells of the TableView. Perhaps not very useful, but at least consistent. And if you want to edit it, so in other words, what you're always doing is you're taking a two-dimensional slice through the data set. The data set might be an 8-dimensional object. You're taking a two-dimensional slice somewhere in the data set. You are projecting that onto this sort of TableView editing plane where you can then edit. And then we need to have a good mechanism for you inserting that edited thing back into the data set. But my claim is that you're always wanting to edit on this sort of two-dimensional plane. And if there is greater depth in some of the elements in that two-dimensional plane, we need another mechanism for you to deal with those. And it's not just splatter them out into the table view. Does that make sense?
I got a little lost in there.
Okay, so I'm going to try it again because I really think this is right. Okay. What is TableView? TableView is an editor of two-dimensional projections of data. Okay, do we agree?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. Dataset is an arbitrary dimensional hierarchical representation of data, right?
Yep.
Okay. Imagine that we have taken this thing here where we're at Jupiter moons and we've gone down to Thebe, okay? That thing there is a nice two-dimensional object,
Yep.
right? That could perfectly well be edited by TableView if we allowed it to be sucked out, put into TableView, pushed back in again, right? But let me go back out to Jupiter, okay? This is no longer such a nice, clean two-dimensional thing because that moons thing is a deeper piece of data, right? So my claim is, if you were to take it at this level and say, let me edit it in TableView, this moons thing would just be a lump of deeper data that would not be readily editable other than maybe deleted or something, right? Although these things here, because they are at that level, are perfectly well editable. See what I'm saying? And so, in other words, what I'm claiming is that what we should be doing, the way we should be thinking about it is that TableView is something that takes two-dimensional slices of data sets and provides an editing view of those two-dimensional slices with a mechanism for stuffing it back into the data set. I don't understand that mechanism yet.
Well, then that's my big question, because we've already shown that stuffing back into the data set is not a thing that seems to be well supported.
Right, I understand, because we didn't really have a thing that was a very interesting restuffing. I mean, so data set, one form of restuffing is to use it as an L value. That's one way of restuffing. I'm not sure that's the best way to restuff things. I mean,
right.
Again,
and so I basically agree with what you said up until the very end, where you said TableView is a thing that eats data sets, because I think TableView is something that
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it eats two-dimensional projections.
Yes, and that's what I disagree with.
Okay.
I think that is a different function. I think TableView.
No, it could be. It could be a different function. I'm saying a function with a bunch of the functionality of TableView. I've said from the beginning of this meeting, it's not obvious to me that there's one function here.
Right, because I think of so TableView, there's TableView, which is, it takes, to lists of lists. Let's just say it simply. It takes lists of lists and gives you a spreadsheet-like interface to editing those lists of lists, and apparently doing it badly at the moment, or at least buggily. So I agree that there is a place for a function which takes a data set, but then also some specification of a two-dimensional slice through it and gives you a nice editable thingamabob, whatever that thingamabob is.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And so but those extra options don't make anything sense for anything other than sort of a data set, which is why I'm feeling this auto evaluation behavior is a mistake. Maybe we need to wait until we have this second function.
Well, I'm not necessarily supporting the auto evaluation behavior, which I understand was the beginning of this meeting. I'm saying that what we're doing here is we're compromising. We've got a design for TableView. We're trying to make sure, it really is a control, but we're trying to give it a few other pieces of functionality because we know these other pieces of functionality are really valuable, but we're trying to keep it as a control as well. This is not going to work, right? We're going to end up with two functions here.
Yep.
And one thing that is front and center a control, and walks and talks like that, and something that is not a control, but probably is implemented using the TableView control as a very trivial wrapper on top of that control. That would be my expectation.
Yeah, and I'm not bothered by that sort of construction at all. There are plenty of precedents for it.
There's a technical issue here. So a data set has a type, and the contents of the data set have to match the type. Otherwise, you've got to recompute the data set from scratch and figure out what its new type is, which may cause the data set to completely reconfigure. So if you don't want it to reconfigure itself, the table view has to restrict the kinds of things you can put in a slot to a particular type.
Okay.
Which it can do to a limited extent, right? But not to
Right.
to a data set
does not
level
have
extent.
Right. The point is that there's a type calculus for data sets. Sadly, not quite the same as the type calculus for the compiler, but similar. And the issue is to use that as something which is a constraining, a type constraining thing for TableView. But let's talk about what the correct flow is. If the goal is just to have TableView prime, the thing that I was calling thingamabob, TableView prime, which is the which is the, I don't know what we call it. I mean, let's call it table editor or something. It's a terrible name. Not the, but okay.
Well, you could call it tabular slice.
No, because we really want to get across the idea that it's editable.
I see.
I mean, it's table editor. Let's just say table editor for now.
Sure.
Okay. So then, I mean, okay. So a naive way to do this would be to simply say, oh God, that scroller is so weird. Okay. So we would say table editor. Okay. So you type in table editor, and you would give it something like table editor of 6.7, and that would give you a table view of a certain size. Would be my vision of it. And then table editor would, and by the way, from a data set, you will be able to call up a table editor through a menu, basically, from the data set. That is, you've drilled into the data set, and it says, okay, you are at a slice level, wherever I had that, of my, boy, that's so weird. Wherever I had that, up here, right? You're at a slice where it is meaningful to do to invoke the table editor. Okay, so let's imagine we're at this slice, one of these at this slice here. It could be meaningful at all slices, but maybe it invokes the table editor only on the parts that can be meaningfully be table edited. Okay, it invokes the table editor here. What would that look like to invoke the table editor? Because the whole point is you've got a trailing data set. In other words, you only want to invoke the table editor on that slice. You've still got the rest of the data set hanging out there, waiting in the wings for when that slice has been finished being edited, because then that slice wants to get reinserted into the whole data set. So that's a different thing than we've had before. It's more like an image editor or something, where you're editing a few pixels. And the way we've tended to do that, like for image editing, is with an attached cell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we can certainly do a table view in an attached cell as well.
So the thing I don't like about this, I mean, by the way, some comments on the live stream have said that being able to store a symbolic representation of what you edited would be highly useful. I don't know whether we have that. I mean, I don't know whether we, in a sense, our editor in all these years, right? And this is something maybe we will be changing in the future, but in all these years, just the editing operations on a notebook do not represent a symbolic stream. We don't represent that symbolically. I mean, when we do, if you wanted to play back a bunch of edits, I don't think, maybe you do have a symbolic representation. It's part of the undo mechanism, John.
Sorry, I hadn't really been thinking about it that way, but yes, in principle, that's possible.
Right. I mean, right. You can store, in principle, play back the edit of, play back the state of the boxes if you had them recorded somehow.
No, but I'm talking about the operations. Like I typed an X.
Yeah.
At this position, I moved my mouse to that position. I moved the cursor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's the kind of thing that web execute does for a browser. It's not beautiful either, how it does it. In browser control, it's not beautiful. It's one of these, DOM poking exercises.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, so one of the things Jason Harris loves to do is to right, create a dynamic of the box expression of a cell. And then when you type into that cell, you see the snapshots of the box expression, which in some level is a representation of all of your keystrokes in that box, but it's not a very useful one.
There's a question from Brian on live stream, a good point, which is he's asking about undo in table editing. So is there in fact undo in table editing?
I don't remember what's hooked up right now, but yes, it would certainly support. If it doesn't now, it's just a limitation of where we're at in the development. It definitely should support multiple undo.
Okay.
And there's no fundamental reason, that should, in this context, it would work a lot like input field.
Dynamic of dataset. So Carl is saying dynamic of dataset flows nicely. It's clear you're editing your dataset. Yes, the problem is that we don't have a mechanism for editing the whole dataset. And I don't even understand how. I don't think dynamic of dataset is quite right, because you'd be saying dynamic X equals dataset, dynamic of X.
Yeah, I mean, dynamic of dataset by itself doesn't quite work unless it's inside of a control.
Which is then a different thing.
Yeah, and then dataset of dynamic doesn't quite work because
that's horrifying.
Because dataset isn't a control; it's a proper wrapper that should that.
I want to come back again here to this, what is the workflow we would like for, okay, so I've got to this state, I have an attached cell, the attached cell can bring up a table editor.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
That's one possibility. Another possibility is I would like, okay, let me just try to understand. If I'm doing this to be able to take this slice of the data set, okay, edit it, then reinsert the result. So I guess the operation that is missing is to be here and to have an attached cell that just says, take this thing that I'm about to paste in and make that be this part of the data set. See what I'm saying? So in other words, you're doing...
Well, okay. So you may think that I'm asking diving too deep into something technical, but it seems foundational to me. So when you're doing all this, where does the data set live? Where does the actual data live? Does it live in the front end, or does it live in the kernel?
Yeah, well, I think what lives in the front end is the table editor slice. I think the rest of it lives in the kernel.
So as you probably know, unless it's a trivial data set, all the data for the data set don't live in the front end.
No, I understand that. I understand it. So I'm saying that only the table editor slice lives in the front end. When you say do a table edit, then that goes to the front end, and then the front end is holding that data for editing. Then what I'm saying is the stuff back operation of take that thing that I've just edited, the slice I've just edited, and reinsert that slice back into the
Right. So where does that happen? Does that happen like immediately when you complete the edit, or is it like sitting there as a payload to be overlaid as part of a shift enter operation?
I think it's a payload. I don't think it's a. I think you should be able to separately do whatever monkeying around you want to do with the table editor, and then say, given this data set, look, I mean, it may just be that there's an operation that we want to have, just a function that just says, take this state of the data set. I mean, something which you could do independent of having got the GUI for the data set. Take this thing, Jupiter, Moons, Himalaya, okay? And just say, it's basically an L value type operation. It says, take this slice of the data set and change it. I mean, it's a replace part on the data set. And it could actually be replace part, potentially.
Okay. I was objecting vociferously while muted, and so maybe it's clear to you, but it is not at all clear to me. what is this L value you speak of, right? So
I don't think I think it's a non-starter. I don't think it. I think the L value is not the interesting case. I think the interesting case is replace part. Okay, so what I'm claiming is that the right thing is more or less replace part, data set. You know, in this case, it would be Jupyter.
Right, and this is a payload. So until you, I mean, we could, right, so we could conceivably have a button which is, you know, do this in place in the output cell, but more probably this would be a payload that when you shift enter the edited thing, then you would construct the new.
What's in place is editing the payload, but you don't get the effect of the payload until a shift enter happens.
Right.
I was confused. Look, what I'm suggesting is that what happens is you can peel this off. Okay, there would be a single in-place GUI way of doing this. Okay, which I consider is the small case of this, because you're not going to want to do a 10,000 thing sort of multi-day editing effort as an in-place weird attached cell thing. That's for the quick edit. I've noticed one mistake, I'm going to fix it. Okay. For the other case, what you do is you peel this off. Okay, you peel off that slice. You edit that slice using table editor, and then you say, given that this data set was called DS, let's say, you simply do a replace part, and the return thing is a new data set, which has that part replaced as is appropriate.
Yeah, it's kind of like in Git speak, it's like you're creating a series of patches to be applied.
Yes, which are applied with the replace part.
This seems very confusing to me. Why wouldn't you just, I mean, the way I imagine it would work is you click a button, it brings up the TableView editor, you edit it, you dismiss it, and when you dismiss it, those things get merged back into
Chris, that's absolutely fine. I'm saying that I want a language level version of how you do that will work even if you're doing it in multiple stages.
Okay.
Right? Even if you have the TableView disembodied out, the table editor outside, and yeah, I'm going to have to go in a second because I think at least I'm supposed to be doing a Q&A about science and technology for kids. This is part of my support the okay.
Stephen, if I may, just very quick question before you run away. So when you write that table editor of XXX, that's really the return value of that table editor.
That's what I mean. Yes, that's what I mean. Whether you put the table editor in there, I don't really mean that. Yeah. I mean the return value. Yes, that's what I meant. And I mean, I think this is a reasonable way to do this. And then table editor becomes, it is what it is. That's what it is. Table editor, and what you give. So I might be wrong. This is wrong. What I said there is wrong. The correct thing when I give table editor is, it's table editor, or might even be table edit. Might be table edit of initial state. Right? And that then gives me an editable table. Yeah, I think this is wrong. And then this, and if I wanted to, I could say table edit of, and then some options that would say the size. I don't know what they would be. What is the right thing? Max items? I don't know what the right term is. Something like this, whereas the more generic case would be just table edit of a thing. I need to go because I'm supposed to be doing something completely different, and I need something to eat before I do that. Okay, this was actually very fruitful, I think. Got a bunch of good ideas.
And we almost finished one agenda item. Yay.
So sorry, Danny and Rob and Constantine. I hope you were able to be productive in the background.
Okay, for another time. Okay, there's more to discuss here, but this was great. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep.